Hello, children. This is Tito coming at you live from TNR. Bow wow. Today we're going to be discussing ancient Egypt. Now, we've already talked about Mesopotamia, right, guys? Which is right here. Today we're going to talk about Egypt, which is to its left. And like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt also developed along a river. We're going to call this river the Nile River. Now, children, Egypt is very, very different than Mesopotamia in that it is very well protected from outside invaders. As you can tell from this map, Egypt is literally dead center in the middle of a desert. It is incredibly hard for any invader during this time period to march its army anywhere near Egypt because of how far it is in the middle of this desert. The only thing Egypt has going for itself is this river. As you can tell, the only life in Egypt is along the river, right? So the desert bordering Egypt does an incredible job from protecting it from outside invaders. We're going to call these, as I mentioned in our last video, natural barriers. The great thing about the Nile River, guys, is that it's so incredibly predictable. It is incredibly predictable. It is always going to flood around the same time every year, and it brings fertile soil. This is going to be huge, remember, because now we farm. We no longer hunt as our primary way of sustaining food. Now we plant. Um, because it floods so predictably, Egypt is actually going to be able to develop a calendar. They're going to be the first to develop a calendar that is honestly, it's pretty accurate. The Mesopotamians develop a calendar, yes, but it's not as great as the Egyptian calendar. The Egyptian calendar is on its own tier of greatness. They come pretty close to our modern day calendar. Because the Nile River is so predictable, because it's so helpful, and obviously it's the only life around Egypt, people are going to call this river the gift of the Nile. It's going to be known as the gift of the Nile because it takes care of the people. It gives them everything they need to survive. Egypt would not exist without the Nile. It would never exist without the Nile. To the left, you guys can see our characteristics, right? The characteristics that make up a civilization: advanced cities, specialized workers, complex institutions, record keeping and writing, advanced technology. Um, those are our five characteristics. And remember, these five characteristics are the same characteristics you guys need to include in your project. So as we go through these PowerPoints or videos, keep in mind of all the different things that these different civilizations give us. All right, as you can see, we have all sorts of cities that develop along the Nile River. Bersha here, Amarna there, Tura there, Memphis, which is probably the biggest, um, Thebes, which is also one of the biggest, and all of these are connected because of trade. People can hop on their little sails and go up or down the river, stop from city to city, pick up goods, and bring it back home. Just like in Mesopotamia, guys, we have a hierarchy. We have a social class. We have a rich and a poor. We have a powerful and a not so powerful, right? At the very top, and this is in Egypt's case, at the very top we have the pharaoh, followed by, the priests and the nobles, which are immediately then followed by traders, artisans, shopkeepers, people who have a decently tough trade to pick up. and then the farmers and herders, and then at the bottom we have your unskilled workers or your slaves. And this is their tier system. This is how people were organized into groups according to what they had. So let's talk about their government right quick. Egypt is ruled by what we call pharaohs, and you guys know this. You guys have seen plenty of movies. You guys have probably seen The Mummy, The Mummy Returns. You guys have seen all sorts of stuff on TV, on YouTube. You guys have heard about the pyramids and the mummies and whatnot. But pharaohs are the rulers of Egypt, and they're actually known as king gods. They are known to be gods who came down to earth and became kings. Therefore, they're divine. They are. Let me spell it out here. They are divine, right? Uh, a lot of people even believe that these pharaohs control nature. So, how did they believe that? Why did people even begin to think they controlled nature? Well, if we come back up here and we look at this, we look at the season of which the Nile floods. In the beginning, a commoner wouldn't know when the season of flooding would come. Only the educated, only the elite, only the people whose job it is to study the geography. And one of those people, although it's not his job to study the geography, but one of those people in the loop was the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was in the loop about everything. So it was incredibly easy for the Pharaoh to come up to his people one day and say, "People of Egypt, you have been so great to me, and I, as your God King, I am going to reward you. In a couple of weeks, I am going to flood the Nile, and your crops are going to grow, and we're going to be wealthy, and we're going to have plenty of foods in our stomach." And guess what? In said time, the Nile would flood, and people would lose their minds. Pyramids. Pyramids were tombs for people. There were tombs for the pharaohs. This is literally their tomb. A huge funeral ceremony was held, and then they would place the tomb inside. I mean, the pharaoh inside. This is their tomb. This is their resting place. And this serves two functions. One, obviously, as a resting place for the pharaohs, but two, also as an intimidation factor. If you were bringing your army across the Nile, I mean, across the desert, trying to reach the Nile, you come across these pyramids, it would make you think twice about attacking the Egyptians. Yes, you would think, man, these guys are full of money, they're rich, look at what they can build. I'm excited. But imagine the power it took to create this. Imagine the time and resources it took to developing these pyramids. This was a way for Egypt to show off to the rest of the world, hey, don't mess with us. We are powerful. And it worked. It served both purposes. Now, just like the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians were polytheistic. They believed in the worship of many gods. Uh, these are just a small list down here, right? We have Horus, we have Isis, we have Thoth, we have Osiris, and Amun Ra. These are some of the bigger ones. But they do believe in multiple gods, and like the Mesopotamians, these guys control all aspects of life. Uh, the seasons, the weather, the sun, the moon, so on and so forth. They recorded all of their information through the use of hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics was their chosen written language, right? And that down below here, that there's an image here of what it looked like. Instead of letters, the Egyptians used symbols that represented different things. So if you guys look here, this is this stands for water. Uh, this is obviously a foot. This is a doorbolt. Now we went back and we've translated it, right. We've decoded it, and we've attached our alphabet system onto their language. But it was never meant to be written like that. I mean, to be read like that. And we were able to decipher hieroglyphics thanks to the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was an artifact that we found years ago that helped us transcribe the language of the Egyptians. And that's why we can read their language today. And finally, guys, like I mentioned earlier, the Egyptians developed a 365-day calendar just like ours. They built huge, vast pyramids, so they were obviously well advanced in their geometry and mathematics. To create a calendar, you have to have a good idea of the astronomy, right? You got to have a good idea of how the world works. And obviously, again, they built the pyramids, and we'll talk more about this in class. But that's it, children. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. This is T Dog signing out. Ow.